How's it going, everyone? And thank you for tuning into this episode of the Hanging Up the Boots podcast. This is part two of the interview with Nick Crash. If you didn't listen to the first half, just hit pause and go do that right now, because there's a lot of important and pertinent, information and backstory and stuff in there. So go check that out if you haven't already. But I'm excited for you guys to finish this one out. It was a really good interview, and I'm excited to have Nick on again. He's an awesome dude and a really interesting individual. So please give it up a second time for Nicholas Crash. Anyway, so we get back from the deployment, and we're all equally thankful that we're back. So
We're all
you,
equally a little bit crazy.
oh, definitely. But then, so what did you do after the deployment and then after the Marine Corps? Because, as you know, the premise of the podcast is to talk about the difficulty transitioning out, and obviously you had a pretty wild time in.
Yeah.
So, what was it like for you after the deployment when you were on your way to the civilian sector and getting to where you are now?
Well, I'll say that so after I got out, literally so we were on the ship and I know that members of my family and my wife at the time were like, "Oh, like we want to see, we want to be there." When you land, like when you come, back to land or whatever. And I think at that point, and I know I share this sentiment with a lot of people, I was like, I don't want to see anybody. I
Mm,
was so in my own head because you had to be in order to like sustain some kind of sanity that I was like, I don't want to see anybody that I know. We landed, we had that formation on the beach, and I immediately turned to a friend of mine, and we had talked about me moving in with her, and I was like, "Are we going?" And immediately I went right from the beach to her house, and I moved in,
okay.
and um, I felt like I was losing my mind,
Yeah, I was about to
and
ask, like, what kind of mental state were you in?
oh, I was in not a good place because at that point, my marriage was apart, and it wasn't so much as that it was. I think I just, for me personally, I think I bear a lot of the brunt of responsibilities because I changed so much in such a short amount of time, and I was under so much pressure that you know I had wanted to be with my wife, um, for a while, and she was one of the few people that really helped me out when I was homeless in Boston, and and then of course, when I was deployed that first time, they passed the legalization of gay marriage.
Right.
And so, that was a big push where I was like, like, oh, like, now before it wasn't really an option, before it was like, okay, cool. And like literally I joined, I think the year after they got rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Uh,
So there was this overwhelmingly positive, experience as far as like people who were gay or, whatever coming out and being like, oh, I can marry the person that I love. And so I was not so much caught up in it, but I was like, like this is now an option that I have and I'm motivated by it. And, you know, positive and it, if anything, but informed. So I came back and, I don't think it would have mattered if we were married or not. I think it just the relationship for me on my part, I felt like I was losing my mind because those cheap Christmas ribbons that like if you cut the edges on the middle part kind of sticks out and if you pull on the end of it, it just kind of like falls apart.
yeah.
Yeah. So I felt like somebody on my mind was pulling on both ends of the ribbon and I could just feel myself unraveling.
Mm,
And I was having all this stress where suddenly like my wife was like, "Well, when am I moving out there?" Like when, what's going on? And then I had to report back to my unit. I had to, do all of these things. I was trying to keep my feet up underneath me and I didn't know how to do that outside of almost total isolation.
mm,
Suddenly now I was responsible for, keeping up communication again. Suddenly now I had to go check in and be a part of like a unit. I shortly picked up corporal and now I had the new duties of an NCO on me. I was dealing with stuff and it was so much pressure that I just shut down. I really did. And
mm.
I think the only thing that actually saved my life is I went out and I told Marissa that I was looking to get a dog and I wanted a Doberman
Okay.
And, so then Marissa sent me a link on Facebook and some guy who was selling his Doberman because he was about to deploy 200 or for like $100. And she was like, go get him. And that's like word for word what she sent me was go get him. So I texted him and I was like, hey man, I'll give you $200 tomorrow cash if you take this down right now and I'll come pick him up tomorrow. And that's how so and he's still with me. He's in the other room. He's sleeping.
Uh-huh.
And having this dog, and then I went up and took my um post deployment leave and I disappeared up into Yosemite for 14 days.
Damn. Okay.
And I took this brand new puppy that I had and I had bought a bunch of camping gear while I was deployed because I knew that I was just going to want to be alone. And I went up for 15 days. I didn't see anybody. I didn't talk to anybody. I just went up into the wilderness and like just existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's like I really needed that. And at that point my wife was like, like what the fuck is going on? Like you're not being supportive or doing what I need. You've been gone, missed you, I need you. And and it's very valid things that she was saying.
Right.
I just wasn't a person, I guess, anymore
Yeah.
in that sense, or the person that or a person that could live. And it wasn't sustainable for me to keep that mindset. And it's very hard to switch back. And I initially walked into mental health because I was like, I'm not okay. Like, before I had such a toxic view on mental health where I was like, you just need to, shoulder on, carry through it. After everything that I've been through in my life, I had only ever just relied on myself. And I figured I was like, if I could go through so much, people going to, therapy for, like, like stupid, what I considered are stupid reasons, I was actually contributing to the toxic idea of mental health in the military until I needed it.
Mm.
And I knew that I needed it. So I walked in there and my initial assessment was I was like, and even before I joined the military, I had this idea that, like maybe I was trans.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I kind of took it in the whole like, well, I have a desire to serve my country and do what I need to do before I even think about me,
Right.
you know. And at that point, I really, when we got back from the deployment, because that had taken up really 2 years of my life, I only had a year and a half left in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And then your last 8 months while you're in the Marine Corps is just you getting ready to get out. So really, I only had a year left to do anything,
Right.
So I went to mental health and I was like, listen, like, I'm not okay. I need to talk to somebody. And I went and I talked and it really helped me out. And then I started talking with the counselor or whatever. And we were talking about like, like my wife and all these things and that I was struggling. And then she kind of looked at me and she was like, you're smart, And I was like, okay, thank you. But like, she was like, you're smart. This isn't it. These are just symptoms. What do you think is the actual illness? Like, what do you think is actually wrong? Like, with your frustrations of everything and you feel powerless, why do you feel powerless? And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, because I have always felt this way. Like, I have always felt like if when now I understand was the helplessness that I felt living in a body that I didn't think that I was mine.
Mm.
There's a difference between being like between owning something and it belonging to you, you know,
Yeah.
like,
Okay. Yeah.
so like you can have, okay, so like
It's like
your
owning a suit that you bought from Men's Warehouse and then having a suit made for you that wouldn't fit anybody else.
exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Or just even the spirituality of it. It's like having a car and having a dog.
Yeah.
One of them transports you and gets you around and it does what it does, but there's no ability for it to have its own entity, and its own spirit. And to me, I'd only been living in a purely physical world. I had only been living in, life is suffering, life is pain. Everything I've ever gone through is just dings and bats and all of these things. And I didn't ever really consider growing myself as a person except by being stalwart, by being, long suffering, by just surviving. And
Right.
at that point, I was so sick of surviving. And I was like, I've never lived. I've never felt like I've actually been alive, that I've ever done anything for me to feel good, to feel happy. Like, where's my peace? Where's my happiness? Because I deserve it. Like, I don't deserve it at the expense of other people, but I deserve it for me. And, she was like, go home and really think about this. She's like, there's something else going here. She's like, I know it. And I think you need to figure it out. And if you want to take control of your mental health, it has to be somebody you have to figure it out. Because I'm never satisfied. I know this about myself. I'm never satisfied when somebody just gives me an answer. I have to know why. I have to know, you know, how it makes sense to me. I have to turn it over in my brain. I appreciate it when people make me think about things differently, but I have to come to my own conclusion in order to know how do I feel about it.
Right. But
So
it's also, I feel like with that, that's such a huge revelation that that's something that you would have to kind of, that is a conclusion that
yeah.
you would have to reach of your own volition. Somebody can't be like, "Oh, by the way, so I reviewed your symptoms and you're trans." And you're like,
And
"What?"
excuse you?
Yeah,
No, no, the fuck, I'm not.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, but like, and I had those thoughts, and even when I was with my ex-wife, uh, I was telling her, I was like, man, like maybe, because we would have conversations, and she's like, "Do you think that you're like trans?" I was like, "I don't know, dude. Maybe. Like, I don't really care. Like, it is what it is. Like,
Yeah.
and I never really took it seriously because I never was in a position where I had to be broken down so much where the things we find comfort within ourselves, when we go through suffering, we go through terrible times, even when everything else in the world fails, at least you can look at yourself and be like, am I healthy? Am I fed? Do I
Yeah.
have a bed to sleep in? Do I have? And so I had to go back and rethink all of the things that I had already justified with myself, being homeless and not being secure. But beyond that, where I was like, how do I know that I'm healthy? How do I know that I exist in the same way that I want to? And so I really sat down and I really had to get to the core of my ego, which is, I believe, why so many people are pushing back about the trans, I guess, idea is, again, it goes back to comf- being comfortable is complacency. If
Mm-hmm.
you can take for granted that you are identify with the body that you're born into, then you don't ever have to ask those questions. But
Mm.
if you don't wake up every morning in pain, and when you look at yourself in the and hate the body that you're in, but you need it to survive,
Right.
like you can't just, it's like playing a video game that you love. You love everything about it, even though it sucks. You love it, and you play it every day, hours a day. It's your whole life. You love this game,
Uh huh.
but the only avatar that you have is not the gender that you are,
Hmm.
and it shapes your experience in the game.
Mm-hmm.
It shapes the way that other characters interact with you. It shapes the choices that you can make. It, it touches everything because at the core of sentience is personal identity, and gender is completely separate from sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
You can still be considered a man, but find other men attractive and be like, okay, I'm gay, but you're still a man attracted to other men.
Mm-hmm.
The sexuality of liking men is not inherently gay because
Right.
women like men, but they have to identify as women. So
Mm.
sexuality is the outward, but gender is very much inward.
Mm.
And you have to understand what makes you you, and to ask yourself the questions like, why do I consider these traits masculine versus feminine? Why do I consider myself a man versus a woman? Am I a trans man, or am I just a lesbian tomboy?
Mm.
But what is the distinctive difference? Well, the distinctive difference is how I consider myself.
Yeah.
When I shake another man's hand, I'm a man shaking another man's.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When I'm a man shaking a woman's hand, I'm a man shaking a woman's hand. I will shake their hand the exact same way. The
Right.
interaction in my mind is compartmentalized differently.
And that's
And
why it's something that you had to arrive to, and it couldn't be a diagnosis per se, is
yes.
because
And the
it is
only
inward.
diagnosis, yeah, the only diagnosis that in order to transition is for you to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. And there are certain psychological impacts that it has upon you. Like, you
Mm.
know, do you wake up in the morning and you hate the way that you look? Like, there's a certain amount of dysphoria with things like eating disorders,
Right.
or, addiction to plastic surgery, or things like that, where you hate the body that you're born into, whereas gender dysphoria is specific to your gender.
Got it.
And
Okay.
transitioning is not a cure, it's a treatment, because
Okay.
it's not necessarily like a psychological illness. It's, I mean, there's even diversity in brain chemistry, and I mean, there's even diversity. What we take for granted for gender, for one is zero, the sex, like even like DNA and things like that. What's interesting is that a paper just come out is that you can have, I'll use you as an example, you can have all of the secondary sex characteristics of a man. You can have a penis, right? No boobs, like all that stuff. However, genetically, your DNA can be female. And the only difference is that your hormones have impacted your body to develop secondary sex characteristics of a man.
Oh, I didn't know that was possible.
Exactly. But that's the thing is we know so little about how the DNA and the genome affects us on top of the fact is being a sentient species and how you process information can be completely different person who can have the exact same thing as you but their thinking is different.
Mm.
I mean, we're told scientifically that having positive thoughts can actually change your brain chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
So by compartmentalize compartmentalizing different information and having all these things happen in your brain consciously, how does that impact how you feel in your body, which I think is an incredibly interesting conversation. I think that's the conversation that people need to have as far as trans individuals. It's not so much as, I'm not saying that you shouldn't question people. I think that if you believe in anything and you cannot defend yourself or
Mm-hmm.
even understand where somebody is coming from outside of your own perspective, then you don't have the right to expect somebody else to accept it immediately. I don't I don't hate when people question me. I don't hate when people say, "Oh, like, trans people don't exist." I'm like, "Well, the funny thing is that I'm existing. I'm here. Like you can't
Yeah.
tell me like, "Oh, trans people don't exist." Like, hello.
Well, I think
I
I
mean, you're
think those
wrong. But,
people,
like
yeah, I think those people they can't, like you made the distinction between gender and sexuality. I don't think those people can draw a distinction between gender and the traditionally
Mhm.
recognized status of biological sex.
And that's fine because I will absolutely
Oh, you're,
acknowledge, more than anything else is that yeah, it's my screen just keeps going out.
oh no, you're good.
Um my Yeah, okay, so it's 1 or 0, right? It's sex is different than gender, right?
Right, and
And the
that's the
idea is like
delineation.
yeah, and that's the whole thing is that, like our understanding of masculinity and femininity. I mean, high heels that are now traditionally worn by women, the fashion started with men
Yeah,
to be taller.
for butchers, I thought, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, for initially started that, and then high fashion took it, and men only high heel women wear it, and now only
Ah.
women wear it, and we consider it feminine. So our
Yeah.
idea of what's constrained by gender and how of all these things, it shifts. Everything is a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is as in the moment as you can make it. And I think this idea that there has to be compartmentalized, it's like, I hate the idea of like, oh, I don't know what gender they are when I'm addressing them. Well, why does that change the amount of respect that you give somebody? Why does it matter if you consider them male or female, or if you can't figure it out? You would still just treat them like a human being, correct?
Yeah.
It's challenging your comfortability with the situation of not having the power.
Mm.
It's if you're put in a situation where you don't have the power to know what somebody's pronouns are, use different pronouns. And if somebody corrects you, just be like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to offend you." And then
Mm.
not and understanding that if it's everybody's attitude with being corrected and giving correction, and it's
Right.
this
That's the big thing I think for a
and
lot of people.
and nobody wants to be corrected or nobody wants to be expected to change because why should they? But going back to we all do things we shouldn't have to do. We do things out of respect for other people and their experiences. And
Mm.
if you have this overwhelming, like if you want somebody to respect you and your experiences and you feel attacked, then I believe that offense starts at home. If you're offended about something, why does that offend you? Why are you giving somebody else the power to affect your peace?
Mm.
If somebody were to call me a slur or something else, like to me, that doesn't affect me. It speaks to the character of that other person. Like,
You also, I will say though that I think the reason that a lot of people have this kind of preconceived notion about things like pronouns and stuff like that is they have not encountered individuals with as mature and nuanced of a
of a
perspective on
take.
all of
Yeah.
this, yeah, as you clearly have. It's the people that will, the trans individuals that will get on people for not knowing their pronouns ahead of time or something like
Mhm.
that. Those are the people that have kind of shaped the narrative, I think, for the worse for people outside of the LGBTQ
Mhm.
IA plus. I don't know
A
what.
B C D E F
Yeah,
G community.
exactly. I don't know what it is. The alphabet
I
soup
mean,
community,
it
but
is what it is.
I don't know what it is
I just say the
anymore. But
rainbow community. That just makes it
oh, yeah,
easier
that
for
does make it a
everybody.
lot easier. But I think that that's the reason that a lot of people have not apprehensions necessarily, but
Mhm.
they have it. It's kind of a walking on eggshells from the outside kind of situation because they've only maybe not even had an experience like that themselves, but those are the ones that get the kind of media attention. Like, kind of going
Mhm.
back to what we were saying about law enforcement earlier, is that there's
Mhm.
a lot of negative visibility on law enforcement because that's what gets the clicks and that's what
Mhm.
gets the attention and stuff like that. And I feel
Oh
like
no,
that's
absolutely.
why, exactly.
And I think it's one of those things where you're absolutely right. And I also tell people it's the same thing where it's like, do I believe that, all right, for example, being political, that's a choice more than sexuality, than gender is.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you attribute your political agenda is the loudest person of your political affiliation representative of you and your individual beliefs?
9 times out of 10, no.
No, exactly. So I would tell people, take it with a grain of salt. If
Mm,
treat everybody with respect going up. If they're not making sense using their logic, if they're not willing to give correction while also, taking it themselves in a mature man, then you're dealing with an individual at that point. You're not
right,
dealing with a movement. You know,
right.
it's this idea where it's like, it's beyond what's easier for me to compartmentalize. As humans, we naturally reject anything that's different. We reject anything that makes us
Mm-hmm.
ask questions about ourselves because we would like to live comfortable for the rest of our lives and never have to ask questions because it's a responsibility. It's
Mm-hmm.
the responsibility of accountability and vetting through information. Now, if you want to be a part of the discussion and be a part of the conversation, then absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Ask questions, and ask respectfully, or as respectful as you can, because anybody who's mature enough to handle those questions and will understand the heart of where you're asking. I've had people use inappropriate terms when, addressing me, or, saying stuff like that. And I'm like, hey, like, going forward, that's not a term that I consider respectful. And I
Mm-hmm.
just want you to know that this is why, because it has negative manner. And is
Right.
that how you meant it? And if they're like, oh no, like, I'm sorry, I never meant, I just didn't have any other words. And I'm like, listen, dude, it's cool. Like, you're not offending me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, perfect example. Whenever, I was just starting testosterone and I still had a very high pitched voice, but, physically I looked like a dude. I would go up to McDonald's and they'd be like, "Oh, hey, sir, how can I help you?" And I'd be like, "Hey, like, can I get a number one?" And then immediately they'd be like, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." Like, "Oh, ma'am, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, "Listen, dude, I'm hungry. I just,
I
I
just want a
just
number
want to
one.
order a Big Mac.
Yeah.
I don't care. I get it. Everybody makes mistakes. I'm not personally offended. I just want to order a Big Mac."
Yeah.
Now, if the whole idea of that conversation was to catch that person off guard and to catch that person wronging me so that I could lash out, that has to do again with the individual. That has to
Yeah.
do with the amount of peace that they want within themselves and to be able to speak for themselves and to have a communicated and had an educated conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and I think just the idea of being open to a conversation that you may not ever understand, but the idea of it is you don't have to understand something to understand why it's important to protect. I
Yeah.
don't have to have a disability to understand that it's important that we have wheelchair ramp. Like, I don't
Yeah.
have to have, I don't have to be blind to understand why it's important for doors to have braille signs on them. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like necessarily that gender identity is a disability, but it's just the things that we do for the least of us is indicative of our place as a society as a whole. It's
Mm.
an indicative of, if how we care for the least of us, bringing back, overwhelmingly our nation is Christian. So bringing back what Jesus said, what you do for the least of them is what you do for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can we sit here and call ourselves, believers of God, or, higher thinking sentient beings, or, even the idea of having a high level of humanity, if we do not acknowledge that there are certain individuals that are not protected and they should be, and the language that we use can be very hurtful to them, and not in a way that it damages their self-image. It damages their image to other individuals who could never understand what is going on.
Mm.
Like, you know something that I've had to break myself of recently is using the R word. I mean, and we could use justifications. My uncle is autistic, my brother is autistic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, currently undergoing testing myself to figure out if I have Asperger's or not, just because it's something that I would like to know, because I'm always interested in how we process information. But I could sit there and justify and be like, oh, and, excuse me, but that's retarded.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's like saying, I could be like, oh, well, my brother's autistic, or like, my really mentally handicapped. And I could sit here and use all these things. But the fact of the matter is if I know these people and they matter to me, what am I telling those around me that it's acceptable to use that language around them that could impact them in a way that I never meant?
Mm.
And if I encourage that kind of language and I encourage that kind of narrative, how will somebody who's never met my brother know that he's a good person, he's a good worker, he's a smart kid, he could hack into this computer if he really wanted to. He's 8 years old, he's already bypassed. He's smart as hell.
Mm-hmm.
But he might be limited by somebody who's encouraged by that kind of language to discriminate against him.
Mm.
And it's something as simple as people are threatened by the whole trans idea is because it's not like race. You can't see it immediately.
Mm.
Trans people are around you all the time.
Yeah.
Like, people have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And, then it's not like, religion, because you see the people around you who go to church. It's not like sexuality, because at some point you figure out who somebody's partner is or what they're attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
Being trans is inherently individual. You cannot see it. It's not meant for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's meant for that individual. And all you
Gotcha.
have to do is just speak in a respectful manner and all of that. But all that I had to come to have that realization when I was talking to mental health. And I was like, listen, this is it. And what's going to help me now is I need to take care of myself. I need to take care of my body. I need to take care of my brain, because my brain is literally rejecting my body.
Mm.
I I felt like I was going insane, because at that point my brain had undergone so much trauma and never healed from it that it was like I felt like I was rejecting my very existence.
I gotcha.
And I think that idea of that, oh, like, so many higher people have, so many trans people have a higher level of suicide. Absolutely. Imagine if every veteran who had PTSD, society was telling you, well, you're just going to kill yourself anyway, so you might as well not go to mental health.
Yeah.
You're, this is something that you chose. You chose to go to war. So you better deal with the negative impacts of it. And you better be okay with the fact that somebody might want to come to your house and kill you just for the fact that you went to war.
Mm. Since you've been out, you definitely seem to be in a better mental place. What got you to that? What got you to that mental place where you started? You worked through. You got back. You figured.
Mhm,
For better or for worse, you figured everything out with your ex-wife. You
mhm,
reached this. You came to this realization about the fact that you're trans, and that was
mhm,
those were the long callback to the beginning. That was the cracks in the
mhm,
foundation of your house. So
mhm,
what have you been doing since then? You're back out in Virginia, so what have you been doing
mhm.
since then to continue improving your life and your mental state?
I think, yeah, going back to that, the foundation of my house, I think everything, psychologically that was pressing on me and all of these things, I was completely broken down. I didn't feel like a person, in at least not a person worth existing. And so I was struggling with, like suicidal thoughts and stuff. And I actually, you know, had tried to kill myself, and not like on an active way. It was more like I had extreme carelessness of my own safety.
Mm,
I went back to Boston to go hang out with a friend of mine, and I just cracked, because I can't even remember exactly what happened, but at that I couldn't sleep. I was jacked up. I was going around and to seeing various homeless people on the street and being like, God, I hope somebody just fucking kills me. Like
mm,
I was at 3 o'clock in the morning, just walking around Boston in like the tourist areas of, like, not even just going in all of these places that I shouldn't have been going to, just being like, God, I hope I die.
mm,
And because I guess my desire to live is so strong that I've never, never felt like I was capable of doing it, because I knew that once I started, it would actually be over, and I'm terrified, truly, honestly, of putting a gun in my mouth and pulling the trigger. I'm
Mhm.
terrified if it would just hit my brainstem and I would just be paralyzed and I would still be alive. Like
Uh,
knowing my luck, I would actually fuck it up. you know? So like that's like my fear of like, if I was actually gonna take my own life, that I would just operate on like a 9-year-old level again and then have to tube to breathe for the rest of my life. And then at that point I would really, really just want to die.
mhm.
So, you know, but I had such a disregard for my life, and what really made me want to get out of the military is the way that my command handled it. I called an officer, and they tell you all the time, they're like, hey, like reach out, doesn't matter who it is. So I reached out, and then I reached out to an officer who was new. He was a lieutenant, but I liked him. I trusted him. He had a good head on his shoulders. And I was like, listen, I'm not in a good space. I just need to talk to you. And so we talked, and he passed the message along like he should have, to the rest of my command. And then I got a call from a sergeant, and she was like, "How fucking dare you reach out to an officer that isn't even your officer?" He was in the same company. How dare you reach out to an officer that isn't in your chain of command? Like blah blah blah. When you come back, you're getting a fucking 6105 and all of this shit.
Mm.
Same day that I reached out for being suicidal. And then as soon as I came back and I was supposed to check in for leave, it was at 4 o'clock in the morning. My plane landed. I went home and I went to sleep because I didn't have to check in until like 7:30. She called me at like 6 and was like, "Where the fuck are you?" And I was like, "I'm like at home. Like I'm just about to get ready to get out of bed to go." And she's like, "Yeah, well, you're fucking AWOL or all this shit." And then she's like, "I'm putting you on duty." So they put a suicidal Marine on duty.
Smart.
Yeah. And I literally, the only reason that I didn't kill myself in the barracks while I was on duty, because I literally sat there sitting at the desk and I was like, yeah, I could like hang myself because I'm the one who's supposed to stop people from like killing themselves. Like, I could just do it, like, and I think the only reason that I didn't do it is because I didn't want to give them the option of having won.
Mm.
Because, since I came out and was like, I'm transitioning, I met with nothing but resistance. I met
Mm.
with nothing but pushback. And it was just like, I had given 4 years of my life to an institution. I had done everything that they asked of me. I deployed twice.
Mhm.
I never asked I never was upset that that was asked of me, and all I wanted to do was just take care of myself, which was what I was told my right to do was.
Mhm.
And I had first class PFTs and CFTs. I was a good Marine. I was in the top 10% for reenlistment when I submitted my reenlistment package. You know, I was a good Marine.
Mhm.
I did my job. I may not have been the best person, may have not have been the best Marine, but I was a good Marine.
Mhm.
And I was proud of that. And they took everything from me. I was the last person in that unit that had joined when I had joined. I was the last person to spend 5 years or 4 years at a unit without getting switched to another one because they changed the orders. I was the most senior NCO as part of experience of being a part of that company, and they fucked with me, and they fucked me on every chance that they could. I got a 6105 for lying about a PFT when I was asking about the standards for females, because at that point I was trying to prep for male PFT standards
Mhm.
and I had gotten it messed up. And I asked a friend of mine, I was like, "What's the standard for females again?" And she told me the number. I don't even remember the number now. And I was like, "I did that many, right?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, like I counted, like you're good."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Okay, cool." And somebody heard that and said that I was trying to cheat on the PFT by saying I hadn't accomplished it. And this is right after I had top surgery, which, like, I went back on duty technically before you're even supposed to, because I felt such a desire to prove that I deserved to be there still.
Mhm.
And so right after my top surgery, because I ran a PFT before I went, right after my top surgery, they told me that I had lied, that I was it delayed my promotion to sergeant. Um, I had to run 3 PFTs in 1 week, 2 weeks after I came back from top surgery, because they said that I couldn't be trusted. And the funny
Oh my
thing
god.
is that I ran every PFT better than the last one.
Nice. Spite is a
And
powerful motivator.
oh god, I think the only reason I'm alive is out of spite.
Yeah.
And then after that, I was like, you know what? Fuck you guys. You don't deserve to have me.
Mhm.
Like I deserve better than this. I've done everything. You don't deserve to have me. And at that point, like it was just a whole level of corruption. Everybody was just like that. The way that they treated you has been unacceptable. Like all of this stuff. Something came to light of how like somebody in LE Battalion was still embezzling funds from it. I was just, this whole place is just on
Falling apart.
fire.
Yeah.
Oh God. And I was like, I can't do it. I can't be a part of it. I cannot be a part of an institution, or even an MOS that says that they're going to uphold certain standards and then don't do it. I can't do it. I'm getting out, because I'm not a hypocrite. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
a hypocrite, it's unintentional. But if I'm aware of this, I cannot, for my own pride and for my own will to live, I cannot be a part of something that is just so broken that it's terrible. So I got out, and I didn't have a going away. I didn't have a plaque.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't given a formation. I, got promoted to sergeant a month before I got out, and they didn't pin me. Um, you know, and it wasn't so much as the fact is that, like, I'm proud of sergeant, because I felt, for me, I was acting, I was doing a lot of sergeant jobs, I was being treated as such by my junior Marines. So it's not so much as that I cared about that. It's just par for the course, where it's like, you owe that to me
Yeah.
to
I
to
earned
do
it.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I earned it. It's mine, and you took it from me.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got out, you know, my dad said, he lived in Virginia at the time. He said, "You can come live with me." So I planned my whole life around that. And then a month before I was supposed to come here, he said, I'm moving to Georgia." It was too late for me to change my life around, so I ended up driving across the country, with my dog. I had everything fit in my truck, and I think that's really where I kind of found my faith. Was I was driving, and I had this moment where I was just thinking about everything, having another existential crisis.
Yeah.
And, I was like, man, I've done so much. I've come this far. And then I just remember justifying, like, where I was like, where is God in all of this? Like, what is God to me? Like, could God look at all of these terrible things in the world and what's happening? And like, but if God is supposed to be personal, why doesn't he care about me? Like, all of this stuff. And it just kind of came full circle, where I was like, I sat there and I was like, you know, if love is God, right? And then I had that thought, and then immediately, where the finishing into that statement in my mind was, if love is God, then God is love, right?
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I thought, if love is God, a van pulled in front of me with the giant letters on the back that said, God is love. And
Damn.
it was just such an emotional moment for me, that it was so powerful, that, if love is God, then God is love.
Like right in
And it
front of
was
you. Yeah.
right in front of me. And as I was driving, having this exact same thought, and I mean, it took up the whole back window of this minivan.
Yeah.
And
There's
I
no
sat
clearer
there,
signs than that.
and immediately I just started crying.
uh,
Immediately I just let all of it out. I was just like, oh my God. Like, and like, and there's no way to say it except this giant relief, and it's hard for me to explain to people, and or even put a weight on other people's spiritual experiences. But all I can say is that it was like knowing somebody was there after having not seen them in,
mm,
like, years, or believing that they would never come. And I
mm,
just had this overwhelming sense that, like, God God loved me. And I was like, okay, like, I am totally valid. I deserve to, like, fuck everybody else. Fuck everything that anyone's ever told me to keep me down. Like, this is what I have to go through, because I can do it, and I'm meant to do it, and it is what it is, because nobody else can do it but me. And it was just this incredibly affirming moment for me, where I was like, God, I fucking missed you. Like, I missed you. Like, Jesus, dude, like, where have you been, bro? Like,
yeah.
or like, you've been here the whole time. I just didn't see you. But man, holy shit, it's so nice to see you. Like, it's so nice to have you here again. And it was just it was so powerful for me, that that's really where I started to be like, okay, now I need to be somebody that I want to be. Now I deserve to be here. And what does that mean for me? So then, I drove, and that was on my way to Virginia, funnily enough, because I met up with a buddy of mine. We went to Disney World. I was drinking myself almost to death at Epcot, because I was like, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die at Disney World. Like,
yeah.
so, on the Dumbo ride, just, weaking it, burning it up,
Yeah.
just
And if
like,
anybody has a legal team that could, and a PR team
oh
that
yeah,
could spin that right, it's Disney.
hopefully my siblings would get free passes to Disney World for the rest of their lives if I
Yeah.
died there, like, so, but, and I had this moment. I moved up to Virginia and I had this overwhelming sense of peace. I was living in my dad's empty home that was for sale for like 3 months.
Mhm.
And I was working construction because I thought I was going to have his support and I didn't. So again, I was right back to being homeless, but it was a different mentality where I was like, I've done this before. I'm going to be okay because I know that I can do this again.
Mhm.
And so, I started doing construction. Then I started doing like for a dog daycare. Now I'm working at this warehouse. I'm not technically where I want to be job wise, but it's more of just like I think being okay with that and working more on myself where I know what I can achieve, you know, when I'm ignoring everything about myself. When I'm ignoring and not asking myself questions that make me uncomfortable or don't improve who I am as a person or my interactions or what I'm willing to do for myself and for other people, I can accomplish a lot
Mhm.
because it means that I'm using people to get where I want to be. And I want to be able to live my life now where I'm at total peace with everything that I do, even if it's not on my timetable. So, I could go be I don't know, an immigration officer. But for
Mhm.
me personally, does that align with what I want to do right now? No, it doesn't because I have my own problems until they start doing stuff that I think is different, i.e., not putting children in cages. But, we can have different conversations about that.
Mhm.
I just think personally for me, there's a better way that we can do it. And if I was going to be in a situation where we can, brainstorm and talk about those things or, you know, do something about it that's better and it's a compromise, then that would be something that I'm interested in. But right now, I'm not willing to compromise on my morals just because I can,
Mhm.
you know?
So
So
what would you do if you, not to fix that whole situation? What would you
no, you're good.
do to what would you do if you could choose a career, now that it seems that you found this inner peace, like what would you do if you could choose a career?
I think I would teach, honestly. I'm absolutely fascinated by like the sociological impact of everything.
Mhm.
Like the sociological impact of this pandemic. I'm absolutely fascinated by it.
Mm.
Personally horrified, but
Yeah.
sociologically fascinated because of how humanity reacts and flexes and contracts depending on external pressures or things that humans have caused versus things they haven't, and what that actually means at the core of it, the core of the self for ego, and then the core of how those egos interact.
Mhm.
And you know I think I would teach and just be more of like kind of a lecturer and not so much as like for sociological or maybe like philosophy or something like that. And it's just to be like, listen, like this is a way for you to think, and I can't give you the answers because you have to figure out the answers for yourself. And this
Mhm.
is the way that you should think to do that. And if you find a better way to do it, go for it.
Yeah.
You know? So, I mean, I think I would do that. I just, have to find something that funds my doctorate degree
Yeah.
before I go,
Yeah, no
before I go
kidding.
and teach. But, if I ended up doing that when I was like 60, 70 years old, I would be okay with that. If that's how long it takes, it is what it is. I have a lot of faith in myself, a lot of faith in, the things that are meant for me. If they're not meant for me, gracefully let them go, you know. So I've got a lot of hope. I'm doing really, really well. I'm doing better than I ever have at any point. And I'm very thankful that I've gone through everything that I've gone through,
Mhm.
just because it's given me even more perspective on the nuances of a situation that, somebody can have strong feelings about, but they don't have the experience to know what questions to ask.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, it's interesting, like kind of in closing, because unfortunately we got to wrap this up.
oh, no, you're
Um,
good.
it's interesting and also, really inspiring that you overcame just this gargantuan amount of adversity from like such an early time that, and it was almost it you kind of hit all the wickets. It was through, we've talked on the show a bunch of times about how good, uncomfortable but good introspection is for, really acknowledging and digging at what the real problems are, because it seems like
Mhm.
that was a huge pivotal point for you, was realizing what the foundational, I don't want to say error, but the foundational issue was this the fact that you did not understand, uh, in light of your upbringing and whatnot, that being trans was affecting you in so many different ways because you hadn't really acknowledged it, or, well, I don't want to say you didn't. I also don't want to say you didn't acknowledge it because you just really didn't have the.
Yeah.
You really
The
just didn't.
ability to ask questions.
Exactly. Yeah. So but reaching that point that you were able to, and coming to that conclusion. So you hit that through the intense introspection. You had this, again, pun very intended, this come to Jesus moment where you were able to find your faith again. Which, even for people who aren't religious, like, having something bigger than yourself to believe in and feel comforted by is a huge thing. And then also, you did take the very important and crucial step to reach out and ask for help, which is something, especially in the Marine Corps, being trans is not, that you were essentially doing that at risk to yourself, which
Mhm.
is, kind of an indictment on the Marine Corps and the military in general. But that does make it that much more impactful and impressive. But it's really cool to see that the all those things working in concert has brought you to a place where now things are still uncertain with career paths and stuff like that, but at least you're mentally in a space where your self is, as you put it, taken care of, and now you can begin to turn the lens outward to focus on the external influences and paths in your life, because after having to deal with so much internally for so long, I'm sure that's a fucking relief.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's one of those things where I'm so protective of it now that I think that I can understand, the vitriol that I think even our society has as a whole towards things that are different. I
Mm-hmm.
think understanding how possessive and protective I am of my peace that I've discovered now, it gives me even more of a lens to understand that that's how people feel about things that can directly affect other people. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the idea is that it's so important to have conversations like these to even be okay with somebody disagreeing with me, because if you're feeling protective about something that is inherently yours, that's not inherently wrong. It's just what you go about doing
Right.
in the pursuit of maintaining that peace.
Mm-hmm.
Is it really, is it maintaining peace, or can it be considered an act of war, depending on somebody's autonomy, based on their rights, based on everything else. It's this, it's just interesting, is that having that kind of ego death, which is really what it
Mm-hmm.
is on a level that a lot of people will never reach. And I do not wish that upon anybody, because it's miserable, it's terrible, it's hard, it's tough. And you know I don't know how I got here, but I am.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those things where it's like, even just understanding where another person might be fighting you, not based on an act of aggression, but it might be an act of preservation, will absolutely open people's eyes to the idea of, what is my motivation behind this battle? Why am I fight? Am I fighting this fight just to prove that I'm right? Or
Mm-hmm.
am I fighting this fight on the principle of the matter of protecting somebody else and providing somebody else and being able to make somebody's future better than my past?
Yeah. Well, that's the trouble. The beauty and the trouble with a society based on liberty is you do have to base society is on one end of a scale and liberty is on another end of a scale.
Mhm.
And you know America has done varying degrees of a good job balancing. Everyone wants to maximize individual liberty as long as it doesn't
Mhm.
infringe on the same of another, and that's just really hard to do.
It's hard
And
to do, but I think it's inherently possible once we start
yeah.
asking the questions. I mean, we can look at the gold, like, let's look at the 50s, right? The golden age of America. But if you look at it, after FDR and the New Deal, we had the highest tax percentage on millionaires and billionaires.
Mm-hmm.
Why were we able to sustain a society like that, where the American dream was possible? It's because we had such a high tax rate on people who are earning an income that normal Americans weren't. And now we protect corporatism, which to the detriment of the working class, as we're seeing now with our whole coronavirus thing, is, where are the billionaires?
Mm.
if it's truly trickled, not like trickling down, if all of these benefits are supposed to come to the working class, where are they now?
Mm,
And it's one of those things where it's like, I'm not saying that there aren't benefits to having billionaires and millionaires, but we're not seeing any benefits that overwhelmingly help the people, which is what this is about, for the people, by the people. And if a large percentage of the people are being taken advantage of in order to, perpetuate a system that literally relies on the blood, sweat, and tears of the majority of Americans, then it's not right. We need to start asking questions. We need to start holding people accountable. What does their language say? What is their meaning behind their dive deep into the heart of what we need and what we should do for the people,
mm,
and not step, because it's possible. It's possible for you to live harmoniously with your neighbors. It's possible for you and I to have this conversation and have a healthy respect for one another, even if we don't agree.
mm,
I can have a healthy respect for somebody that I can have a completely different ideological viewpoint from, as long as they're able to articulate it. If we can articulate it, we can achieve it.
yeah, and
So
that's why I do
go
think
ahead.
that the oh sorry I was just gonna
No,
say
you're good. You're good.
kind of we keep stepping on each other like
Oh, no, you're good. Sorry, I
that.
will talk forever. I mean, you've noticed that.
No, me too, man. Me too. But yeah, that's why conversations like this are so important, and that's kind of to tie it back to the final closing note is that's why people need to hear things that they don't necessarily agree with or haven't experienced for themselves. Like for example, I think you're the first person on the show that has um where faith has been a large part of you reaching a place mentally that was sustainable and was healthy. And for all intents and purposes, having that come from the first trans individual on the show is very counterintuitive. Coming
Isn't
from, yeah,
it?
coming from an evangelical background, I know a lot of people who, a lot of people close to me that are, having a hard time dealing with religion even to this day because they grew up very entrenched in the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormon faith, and
Mm.
it's affected them, even decades later. And so for you to have come out the other side of an evangelical Christian family as a trans individual and then reclaim your faith in a way that is beneficial to you is huge. And
I
I
mean, I
think,
will say that I'm not Christian. I will say that inherently I believe my faith to be more Jewish, but it's not so much
oh,
as that. You're right.
okay,
It's more faith in the sense that, it's not regimented by the ideas of religion.
right.
Why for me is like, there are I have overwhelmingly a positive interaction with what I believe that the Christian aspects of a lot of my faith is. I do go back to a lot of, Jesus's teachings, because there's a lot of things that even in all the monotheistic religions that are, Muslim, Christian, Judaism, you know
Mm-hmm.
it's Jesus is either a prophet or the Messiah,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a messenger of some kind. And
Right.
I think it's important to understand that, if that's where we can start building a basis of, is either way, whatever those teachings are, we understand that those teachings are important. you know Jesus was, to some, either a prophet or the son of God, but he still went to the temple no matter what he did, which was the supposedly the place of God, and he
Mm-hmm.
threw out people that the humans of the temple had allowed to take advantage of worshipers.
Mm-hmm.
That he went in and flipped the tables of merchants and tax collectors who were preying on people of faith, because their faith was being hijacked
Mm-hmm.
in order to propagate a business.
Yeah.
And it truly, whatever your faith is, it needs to remain faith, because once you buy into the idea of religion, that's where it's easy to start labeling people. God, whatever you believe God to be, God is universal, God is personal. What is meant for you is meant for you, and it is meant to be in a way that you can understand it. God is infinite and omniscient. If you could not understand him or it or whatever, if God was not meant to be understood, we would not have an understanding of God.
Mm.
And inherently, my the greatest comfort of my life is, the passage of love. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it holds no record of wrongs. That's love.
Mm-hmm.
And if for me to be able to find that comfort outside of myself and then be able to propagate that towards myself is inherently faith.
Yeah.
It's, forgiving and forgiving myself and forgiving others and being able to out. God calls us not to fear. God calls us to act in faith, that if you truly believe that you will give up everything in this life to take care of the least of us. It's easier for the camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to go to heaven. But why is that? The love of money is the root of all evil. If we take all of these lessons and we look at our society today, we will understand that we've compartmentalized these lessons and restricted access to the idea of love based on what you identify as, or what church you go to, or what can you do to further a political agenda or a religious belief, when in actuality it doesn't belong to anybody. Love doesn't belong to just one person. It belongs to all of us, and we're all capable of feeling it and all capable of giving it to one another. It's the only thing that we truly have that is inherently uniquely human.
Mm. That's that's
and
that's cool.
and if again, if love is God and God is love, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the best thing that we can do to each other, for each other, is be kind, be patient, be understanding, don't hold any record of wrong, be just, be accountable, be able to act not out of bravery but not out of fear. You act because you know it's the right thing to do, without worry about you know whether or not it'll impact you, because if you truly trust your God to protect you, then nothing will come to you that you can't handle.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where it's like, truly faith is unique and inherent, it is personal. And that's what you come down to, stripping the ego, which is why I think it's funny is that such a push against from the religious community is pushing against this questioning of the ego. Is why, if your God can't stand to be questioned, then is he really God?
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot ask yourself these questions and have a conversation with your neighbors and with the people that are around you and the people that care about, speak about these things that impact all of your lives,
Mm-hmm.
are you really talking about anything that's important?
Mm.
And it's that's the frustrating thing for me, is coming from that evangelical background and seeing through everything, where it's like the Marine Corps. Like, we can talk about honor, courage and commitment, and those are the ethos that we love to see, and those are the ethos that we're like, damn, that's a good Marine. But when I look at the institution, is that what I see? I see the MU
Yeah.
scandal. I see
Yeah.
the rejection of Marines with PTSD. I see, this demonization of, people for being people, because we are all individual. Like, we all have our own individuals. So the honor of it, what are we doing to uphold our honor? We're
Mm.
not holding people accountable. The courage, it's easier to conform, so we force people to conform, where, oh, hey, don't make a big deal out of it because it might impact my career. Commitment, where's the commitment to the Marines when they follow through, when they display honor and courage, which means that they aren't popular, but where's your commitment as an institution to these Marines?
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, is your title worth anything?
Yeah, those are the big questions, and I think that's one of the reasons that so many people come out so disenfranchised. But that a lot of people do come out changed people.
Mm-hmm.
You were very successful in taking um, the best characteristics that the Marine Corps can instill in somebody and
Thank you, I
take them
appreciate
away.
that, really.
Yeah, of course, yeah. And you managed to, despite the experience that you had, take those and ran with them. Like you were able to internalize the things that were good, and now you're looking back on it with very valid, um, not judgments, but very valid questions about, is this institution doing what it's talking the talk, but is it walking the walk? And a lot of
Exactly.
times it doesn't, and that's why I need to, or I felt the need to do this and have you on. And unfortunately we do need to wrap this one up. So But damn, dude, it was fucking good talking to you.
No, thank you. I really appreciate having me on. Like I love this. I love this kind of stuff. It's always
Absolutely.
interesting to me.
Absolutely. I want to have you back on again so that we can kind of deep dive into some other stuff. We didn't we you know we got through the meat and potatoes of it, but
Oh
I do
yeah.
want to have you back on so that we can get into some deeper stuff. So the closing notes, I guess, would be, the intent, the introspection, faith if you are so inclined. I'm spiritual as well, so I would recommend that to people if they are um if they are so inclined. Some people have a really bad taste of religion in their mouth, and
Mhm.
that's
That's okay.
that's fair. Yeah, you definitely don't need to if you don't want to, but it is beneficial in a lot of situations. But and then you know the making sure you know who you are, what you stand for, have a strong moral code. The great Ron Swanson of Parks and Rec fame was saying that, or I guess it was Nick Offerman talking about the character of Ron Swanson, was saying, he's a trope of a man because
Mhm.
he, cuts wood and, eats steak and stuff like that. And he was like, but the reality of it is, I mean, I'm butchering the quote, but he was like, I cry at, romance movies and stuff like that. And he's like, but, all you need to be a man is, have a moral code and stick to it. And
Mhm.
I think that's something that everybody can take away. But, I'm glad you're doing so much better, and I'm really glad I could have you on, dude.
No, no, thank you. I appreciate it. I guess the last thing I want to say is I wouldn't be here if it wasn't, for the people that I was with, like Marissa and Amanda and, you and everything like that. It's, I walked with giants, and it's inspiring to be able to walk with people like that and have people hold you accountable and know that you can be better than you are. So, I really do appreciate everybody that I've met, everybody that I've come in contact with. It's kept me humble and it's kept me motivated. So no, I really appreciate I love the fact that you're, man, really, I think you're going to reach a lot of people and you're going to start a conversation that needs to be had.
I hope so. I hope so. That's the goal, because I've talked about it before, but I felt very alone in what I was feeling after the Marine Corps. And it came through just talking to people, realizing that I wasn't, and I wish I had known that when I was going through it. And so I'm trying to offer that now so that people don't have to experience what I went through, and what you went through, and what it seems like everybody's gone through in one way or another. So, but yeah, man, let's do this again sometime. All right.
Yeah, no, for sure.
All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoyed both parts of my interview with Nick, because I really did. He's a hilarious dude. We laughed a lot during that podcast, and it was just a really fun interview to do. And he's a really fun guy to get to know. So I really hope you guys enjoyed that. You can follow him on Instagram at crashfire_no rescue. Um, it's like a quadruple entendre. I won't get into it. But he's also on Twitter at HypeTrainHobo. He's on Twitch at that same handle. He's getting into streaming, so go show him some love. Give him a follow. But don't forget to follow the podcast at hutb.podcast to stay up to date with new content, upcoming episodes, and things like that. But as always, I appreciate you guys very much and all your support. Tell your friends if you think they'd be interested or if they would want to be on the podcast. But I'm really thankful for all of you, and I'll see you next time. You know you're more than bad.